Hello and welcome to universalaesthetics.us channel. My name is Konrad Laki and this is the very first video. So this is a bit of an occasion for me actually, and I've decided to make it about a subject that can be a little bit polarizing, I think, at times, but I think nonetheless a very important one. And we're talking about today we're talking about the hormone and antibiotic residue levels in chicken meat. So chicken breast, one of the most popular protein sources today, for good reasons. It has hardly any flavor, it's fairly inexpensive, great protein content, about 22 grams per 100 grams, and hardly any caloric value compared to many other types of meat, so about 110 calories per 100 grams. So chicken meat and chicken breast meat specifically is very popular these days, but there is still a lot of, I think, misconception regarding whether this actually is it's safe to consume in larger quantities, and there are a lot of people who are choosing organic chicken purely because they're just not really sure whether they by eating commercially grown chicken they are actually being healthy and safe, and I understand that because there is a lot of bad press and there's a lot of just generally negative view on the subject of chicken farms, growing chickens commercially. This is just not something that we can say many nice things about, and it obviously does tend to leak into other areas, for example the dietary area specifically. But today I want to clear out any confusion, any potential issues. I'm going to tell you exactly how safe is the chicken consumption and whether you should be limiting this type of meat in your diet at all, or whether it's basically a matter of just hitting your protein macro. So without further delay, let's get it started. So I believe the very first thing we should focus on is probably the most straightforward thing, and that's the hormone levels in chicken meat, or well, the hormone residue levels in fact. So what's the deal with that? I mean, you probably have heard on several occasions people saying, oh, I'm not going to touch non-organic chicken, I'm not going to touch chicken at all, there's just too many hormones, too many antibiotics, but hormones specifically mentioned on several occasions. I have heard that myself many times, in fact. So, where did that come from? Why do we believe, or do many people believe, in fact, that there are dangerous levels of hormones in poultry, in chicken meat specifically? So the answer to this is fairly simple, and like I said, it goes back to the negative view of the farming or chicken growth in general, where you see those chickens really sort of packed tightly in their cages, and you've been told that they are being treated with various drugs in order to prevent the spread of diseases, and you're being told that they are actually eating they are being fed a ton of drugs in order to promote growth. And obviously hormones, steroid hormones, are some of the best growth promoters, so it's a natural link from A to B, where growth equals the use of steroid hormones. However, as it turns out, there actually aren't any steroid hormones being used in poultry. Whilst there really aren't any health concerns for hormone residues in meat in general, in chicken meat, the reason why the hormones are not being used for growth purposes is because it's just not practical. So, and I know this sort of area is probably not very well known to many of you, because honestly, whose area of interest is growth promotion in poultry? Okay, it's a very narrow field of interest. But as I dove into this, because I really wanted to find out all that information for you guys, and I've been actually interested in the area of food processing in general for quite some time. As it turns out, the reason why hormones are not being used in poultry production in, and the reason why you don't need to worry about it is practical. It will require injecting the animal several times per day, and the government, or like FDA in the United States, and the EU has rules for how quickly the drugs have to clear from the system of an animal, and typically we are talking about 0-day clearance rates, which means the animals would have to be injected daily in order to for that drug to clear instantaneously the moment the injections were stopped. So essentially that combined with a very small effect of that particular growth promotion on the birds, as opposed to the other growth promoters, was just the major cause, and is the major reason why the steroid hormones are just not being used in poultry at all, and therefore it's something you don't have to worry about. So great news, unless you thought that you will be using chickens as a trenbolone delivery system. Well, in that case, I just have to disappoint you. Okay, so now that we know that the hormones are not really an issue and we don't need to really concern ourselves with hormone levels in poultry, so again, chicken breast meat specifically, what about antibiotics? So this is actually a much more complicated subject, but still, fortunately, there are some pretty straightforward, again, answers to these questions. So the number one thing that we need to consider when it comes to antibiotic use is the fact that the general widespread use of antibiotics is not actually from the perspective of consumption, it doesn't really affect us. So unless you don't cook your meat through and through, it will not affect you in any way. The levels of antibiotic residues in meat are so low that in fact they don't actually have any impact on our physiology whatsoever. And to give you a very good example of this is, most of the time when you prescribe an antibiotic drug in order to cure a bacterial infection, the typical dosages are, depending of course on the drug and the bacteria, but they're probably typically between 250 and 500 milligrams per dose, and that dose will be repeated twice or thrice per day, and that's an effective dose. So for example, if the dose is between 250 milligrams and 500, then it means that 250 milligrams is the minimum effective dose that will have an effect. Anything less than that could be ineffective and not cure anything at all. So the level of antibiotics provided to the animals are much lower than the minimum effective dose. In fact, the level of antibiotic residues now is typically established at round about between 100 micrograms to 500 micrograms. So that's on average. Most of the antibiotic residue levels need to be within that range, depending on the antibiotic, of course. There are many different ones, but that's the kind of range we're talking about. Again, 100 to 500 micrograms, but that's per kilogram of meat. So actually, for a portion, which is, let's say, a serving of 100 grams, we're talking about 10 to 50 micrograms of antibiotic residues. These are values 100 or 1,000-fold less than the minimum effective dose of an antibiotic. So effectively, having got any impact on our physiology. And this is something that I would like you to take away from this. If there's anything that you're going to take away from this video, is that we are not concerned with the health implications of antibiotic residues. That's not the reason why we are trying to phase out antibiotic use in animals. That's not because the meat is somehow toxic to humans. It's because it contributes to antibiotic resistance, and means that in the future we might be facing an issue where we have no viable treatment options for bacterial infections. That's the reason why we are trying to phase out both the FDA in the US and the European Union. In fact, the European Union has already banned antibiotic use for non-essential purposes in 2006, and FDA is phasing out since 2013 antibiotic use. But that's the purpose for this is strictly related to our current and future situation, where we don't want to be put in a situation where antibiotic use will become ineffective. So, and because there is animal antibiotic use is a contributing factor to overall antibiotic resistance, just like we, each and every single one of us who ever took antibiotic, is contributing to that resistance as well. But like I said, if we eliminate at least a portion of the problem, then we can at least slow it down, and that will give us time to come up with alternative options for treatment drug-resistant bacteria and bacteria in general. So this is the main reason why, and if, like I said, if you take away anything from this video, is the fact that meat is not toxic, chicken meat is not unsafe for consumption, there are no hormones used in poultry, and the antibiotic residue levels are so low, they are hundreds of times lower than a minimum effective dose of the antibiotic, and have got no impact on your physiology. Thanks very much for watching. I hope to see you guys again.